Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our weekly series of shirim on Shaar HaYichud, the Gate of Unity from the Mitteler Rebbe, where we're going slowly but surely down each and every point along the Seder HaHishtalshelus to reveal all of the nearly infinite stages that it takes for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to conceal himself enough from within his absolute infinitude to reveal reality as we grasp it. So even though we've gone through so many stages and so many variations of the emergence of potential prior to actualization. Nevertheless, the entirety of the Seder HaHishtalshelus, especially the way that the Mitteler Rebbe is teaching it to us, is so that we can become aware of all of the gradations and all of the levels that separate the absolute infinitude of prior to creation and this worldliness as it expresses itself in this moment, and to show us how, in spite of all of the myriad levels that operate in between these two, there is still a fundamental unity between the beginning and the end. Sofam na'utz betchilasan v'tchilasam na'utz besofam. The end is embedded in the beginning, and the beginning is embedded in the end. And that, in spite of all of the details and gradations of the middle territory, nevertheless, ani rishon va'ani achron, mi baladai ein elokim. I am the first, I am the last, and between me and that, there is absolutely no differentiation whatsoever. Ani Hashem lo shinisi. That's what the Mitteler Rebbe is trying to bring us into, the awareness of the klal hakol, which is the unity between the beginning and the end, and all of the riboy pratim, which is the particularization and the riboy of levels after levels after levels that seemingly separate the beginning and the end, but ultimately are all going to be revealed to have not been separations, but furthering expressions of that unity. So now we are in Parak Yud Zayin of Shaar HaYichud, the gematria of Tov Haganus. So we're going to see how we're going further into the Halal, further into the emergence of the Kav within the Halal. Last time we spoke about that Igul Hamakif, that general circularity that surrounds all existence, which is the Tiru Tata. And now we're going to go to the next level of expression, which is going to be expressed here. Zak the Heilige Rebbe. V'hine me'ata, and now yesh lahavin beprate inyan hakav kamoshahu bebechinas igulim. Once we've explained the first expression of the circularity of the kav as it enters into the halal hapanui, which is that encircling circle that covers all things that take shape within it, we also know that, as the Arizal tells us, that at first, once the kav, the ray of infinite light, re-enters into the halal and it activates that rishimu and that irreducible trace of infinite light, so the first shape that the kav takes on is going to be circularity. It's going to be the igulim. Igulim take shape one after the other until we come to the innermost igul. Now, when it comes to the igulim, the outermost igul is much higher, and the lower and lower we go down towards the center of the igulim of those circles is going to be the minimization of levels. So the highest circle is the most externalized circle, and the most interior circle is going to be considered the lowest circle. We're going to see a reversal of that order when it comes to the linearity or the lines that emerge after circularity. The Arizal teaches us that the first two stages of experience that take shape within the Halal HaPanui through the activation of the Rishimu that is revealed through the Kav are going to be Igulim and Yoshar. The circularity is the immature state of the Nefesh where all things are equal, where there's no differentiation because it's not mature enough to develop a healthy understanding of differentiation, so to speak. And then after the Igulim and after the circular unity, which undoes the entire hierarchical principles of balance, then we're going to see how the main expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light vis-a-vis the Kav is going to take shape through Yoshar, which is linearity. So the first expression, the most immature expression within the Halal HaPanui, which at the same point is rooted in a higher revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light, which is the root of its unity, is the secret of the Igulim, the all-inclusive, all-equalizing, circular perspective where everything is the same. And then within that space is going to emerge the differentiation of the lines of the right, left, and center, which compose the system that we have a grasp of. In the beginning, at first, we have to introduce ourselves to the very beginningness of the Kav, that entry point of the Kav of infinite light as it re-enters into the territory of the Halal HaPanui. Sheba b'bechinas or penimi. First, the Kav comes down into the Halal and it expresses itself as an interiorized light. It's a light that can be grasped within the Halal now. First, it's going to be the or penimi, v'achar kach מתעגל ונמשך בבחינת אור פנימי וחוזר ומתעגל וכולי כמבואר בעץ חיים. So we spoke about the first outer circle, that the ray enters into the kav and it encircles and it becomes the giant circle. But then it doesn't just stop there. It continues to circle and circle and circle till it becomes 10 concentric circles within one another. That's what happens with the kav. It continuously expresses itself in that spiraling pattern of the circles encircling themselves. That's the element of the orpanimi, and it continues to encircle itself, and each subsequent circle is a more interiorized light. Kemavur be'etz Chaim, as explained in Eitz Chaim, the Eser Sviros Igulim, ha'elyon mekulam meshubach mekulam, v'hapnimi mekulam garua v'chule. So just as we said, once the kav enters into the halal and it begins to encircle the halal, so that spiraling nature of the circle, the more exterior level of the circle is going to have a higher quality. It's going to be more encompassing, and the more interior the level of the circle, the lower it's going to be in quality, and therefore it's going to encompass less. This is the opposite of the relationship that we have to hierarchy when it comes to the linearity of existence. By circularity, the more externalized, the more encompassing, and by linearity, which is going to be the orientation that we have of right, left, and center, the more interior, the more powerful, and the more exterior, the less powerful. So there's going to be an inverted relationship between the quality of the circles and the lines. By circles, the more external, the better it is, the more internal, the lower it is. But vis-a-vis linearity and the Yoshar, the more internal it is, the higher it is, and the more external it is, the lower it is. Because when it comes to Yoshar, ha'elyon garua v'hapnimi meshubach, that which is externalized and higher is going to be seen as deficient, while that which is more interior is going to be considered more praiseworthy. Ubir hadavarim. So we have to understand what these igulim are and what this differentiation of value is going to be between circularity and linearity, the all-inclusive, unified perspective of the igulim and the differentiated perspective of particularity that emerges with linearity, with the Yoshar. The explanation of the matter is as follows, says the Mitteler Rebbe. Hine yadua shebebchinas ratzon kadum zeh, hagam shelagabe bebchinas ratzon haposhut hamuchlat be'atzmus nikra hispashtus ratzon, aval adayin hu beha'elim, velo begilui klal. We have to understand that the first instantiation of ratzon, this original will that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to reveal himself in the world, in spite of the fact that in comparison to the previous level of absolute simplified ratzon that is contained within the essence of the infinite, so to speak, even though in accordance with those highest levels of expression, this lower level of the ratzon hakadum is considered as something that is measurable and an expression of will, nevertheless, it's still completely contained within itself, and it has no element of revelation whatsoever, because all it is just the extension, the hashpa'a and the hamshachas haratzon hapashut shel chafetz chesed shehuchlat ba'atzmus mikvar kach yiyeh b'poyel mamish. So the first and highest level of ratzon that we begin to talk about, the ratzon hamuchlat towards the creation of existence, which reveals itself by way of the kav entering into the halal, we speak about it in the language as if it's a graspable ratzon, as if this ratzon is emergent so that we actually have a way of grasping it. But in truth, the graspability of this high level of ratzon is only in relationship to the ratzon hamuchlat shekala ba'atzmuso that preceded it. That on that level, that ratzon, even though we still use the language of ratzon, nevertheless, it's not separate and apart from the essence of God, so to say, and therefore there's no experience of grasping it, neither by way of affirmation nor by way of negation. So that level of ratzon, which is so satum bestimu destimen, which is concealed in all matters of concealment, this next subsequent level of the ratzon hakodum, this initial and original will towards creation, it seems as if it's an extension of a ratzon from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It seems as if it's this graspable thing that now has expressed itself externally outside the circle of God's essence, so to say, but nevertheless, that's only relative to the previous level. But in and of itself, this gradation of ratzon is not something that has been revealed yet. It is still something that is completely contained within the territory of infinite ungraspability. Why? Because this Ratzon Kadum that we're speaking about, this initial will and this initial desire towards the actualization of existence that begins to actually look like something, it's nothing other than the extension and the expression and the drawing down of that original and fundamentally simplified will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Chafetz Chesed Shehuchlat Ba'atzmusa Mikvar, which is rooted in the fundamental awakening of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desire to express himself by way of goodness. So this Ratzon that we're talking about, this Ratzon that we're talking about, the Ratzon Kadum, which enters into conversation, it's nothing but an extension and a revelation of the interior Ratzon to it. And therefore, just as the interior Ratzon, that inner quality of the will in its essence, as it continues to be contained within the essence, is not something that can be considered something that is externalized to the Baal HaRatzon Kavyachol, so too any extension of the Ratzon HaKadum, which is a secondary extension of that original Ratzon HaPashut, it also is going to have those same qualities of being completely contained within themselves and not something that is subject to revelation. Umiyad kesha'oyle b'machshava zos sheyihyeh hakol hu nikra machshava v'ratzon kadum shekolel kol ma shebetocho ritzonot pratim kenizka le'el b'mashal habinyan. This secondary stage of will, which is separate and apart from the original willfulness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kavyachol, which is still fundamentally contained within the infinite itself. The reason that we refer to it as a level that's lower than the previous will, even if they're both not subject to revelation, is because that original level of the Ratzon HaPashut is not something that can be discerned as having any qualities to it. It's not something that can be discerned as having any space for all of the subsequent proliferation of details. But this Ratzon Kadam, which immediately, once HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Meshayer B'daiso Kavyachol, B'pnimius Ritzono Kavyachol, something that is completely ungraspable, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a Choy Katov Lehetiv, immediately there emerges the shape of that Ratzon. And that general shape of the Ratzon HaKadam, is a Ratzon that contains all forms of Ritzonos, all eventual extensions and expressions that are rooted in the divine desire and the divine will to create existence in accordance with its particularity. That emerges in the fullness of the shape of itself prior to any revelation. And that's what we refer to as the Ratzon HaKadam. So there is the Ratzon HaMuchlat which is Pashtus, but Pashtus in all forms of Pashtus, which is not something that can be discerned either by way of the general or the particularized expressions of it. And then immediately, as a result of that emergence within HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence, Kavyachol, there emerges this secondary form of a Ratzon Kadam, which is how all of those Ritzonos are eventually going to emerge afterwards, but they're still not revealed in any practical way. Imkain, adayin ratzon kadum zeh hakol ba'atzmo bilti hisgalus lachutz, aval mimenu na'aseh hakol achar kach. So we see that this in-between stage of Ratzon, which is something that is more externalized than the Ratzon HaPashut, which is not something externalized whatsoever, but it's not yet externalized in any real way, is this in-between territory of the Ratzon HaKadum, which is still fundamentally contained within the essence of God, so to say, without any expressivity outside whatsoever. But nevertheless, it's from this station, this in-between of the Ratzon HaKadum, which is going to be the emergence of all subsequent emergence. V'zehu ki hu amar b'machshava keduma v'yehi. Meaning, originally in this Ratzon, it is the setup of all eventual proliferation, in spite of the fact that it's not revealed yet. So it's still something that's shayach to the system of unfolding. Hu amar. What is that emergence of the preparation of being? That's the machshava keduma. That's the Ratzon hakadum that contains all possible expressions within itself prior to expression. And then v'yehi, and then being actually emerges from within this state of the potential of being, which is simply an extension of the pure potentiality of being prior to the differentiation of potential. So there's three levels. There's the pure Ratzon, HaPashut, HaMuchlat, that is not something that's subject to revelation whatsoever. And then immediately as a result of that, there emerges a secondary sheath and level of the Machshava Keduma, which is still not revealed, but it holds all possibility within itself. And from within that place of all possibility being held in a purely potential form is going to be the emergence afterwards of actualization, which is the secret of Hu Amar, that's the Ratzon HaKadam V'yehi, and everything emerges from within that place, V'chulei. V'nikre Chaye Koil Ha'olamim. And it's referred to this Ratzon Kadum, this entrance of the Kav into the Halal, this extension of the original and ungraspable, unspeakable, undifferentiated emergence of will that reveals itself in the form of the potentiation of all the various wills that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to reveal in the world. This is referred to as the Chaye Koil Ha'olamim. This is the source of all Chayus. It all emerges from this place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cultivates the Ratzon. This is from the Rosh of Adam Kadmon ad Ekev the Adam Kadmon Besoifa Asiya, from the very top of the top to the very bottom of the bottom, from the upper worlds of Adam Kadmon down to the lowest expression of Adam Kadmon's Akvayim within the world of Asiya. All of it is contained within that original Ratzon Kadum, which is the secret of the full picture of what's going to emerge. V'hainu kol hayitzurim loy nechad v'chulei. There is absolutely nothing lacking from this original shape of the Ratzon Kadum that emerges. She'ein prat hayoter achron shelo kadam lihios b'ratzon u'machshava zu. That there's no particularized particular, no matter how low down along the rungs of particularization it goes, from the most particularized, lowest particular that can possibly be particularized in the system of unfolding, which is the soif of the Olam Asiya. All of it is originally contained within that original emergence of the Ratzon Kadum, of the Machshava Kaduma, which is a secondary level of Ratzon after the Ratzon HaMuchlat, but something that is emergent fundamentally and immediately as a result of the Ratzon HaMuchlat. This Ratzon Kadum, which is now graspable to us, at least that we can't grasp it because it's not yet revealed. Everything without any yotzim naklal is contained within this original machshava kaduma of Adam Kadmon. Va'adarabba seif maaseh kamoy besoif Elef Hazayin, Allah b'machshava kaduma zu tchila k'moshe amar b'makom acher ba'arichos. And Adarabba, it's not only all of the things are contained within this original Ratzon HaKadum, which contains the entire story of existence from the top to the bottom. It's not the surprise that the bottom is included within it as well, but as we've said so often, the bottom is in truth the main purpose of the entire unfolding of creation. That when it was Allah b'ratzoni l'mivra ha'olam kavyachol, and then that extended into the shape, the general shape of potential revelation prior to revelation, it is very specifically the last rung of the ladder that drives and motivates the awakening of that desire. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to express himself in the dir b'tachtonim. So if maaseh b'machshava tchila, the end of action, that asiya da asiya, is the origination point of the entire extension of the Ratzon HaKadam, of that Ratzon of Ak, which is the full picture, the Ratzon of all Ritzonos that holds all possible expression within itself. The main purpose of that is ultimately going to be that which is revealed at the end of the 7th millennia, which is the Gilui of Mashiach Lamata Lamata. And in parentheses, Ubelashon HaZohar HaKadosh, and in the language of the Zohar, this level is referred to as Atika da Atikin or Atika Stima. This is referred to as Atika da Atikin, the ancientness of ancientness, or Atika Stima'a, or the concealed ancientness. V'hu bechinas ra'ava d'kol ravin. It's the secret of the will of all wills, the desire of all desire that's revealed at Shalashudis. Iloyin de Iskaliyin b'mitzcha de Adam Kadmon. It's the ascendant, transcendent will of all wills that is revealed at the mitzcha of Adam Kadmon. Ki beratzon meluba shatainu. The reason that this ratzon is revealed at the apex of Adam Kadmon, of Atika, is because Atik is the revelation of tainug, of pleasure, and pleasure is what motivates all desire, just as desire is revelatory of pleasure. V'hayula achadim mamish, and the pleasure and the desire of this first instantiation of the ratzon hakadum is unified together, where ratzon and tainug and ratzon are unified together. Uberatzon hapashat hahiyuli shabachafetz chesed Hayuli hayakol bol gam hatanug hapashat ba'atzmuso shenikra sha'ashui melech ba'atzmuso v'chulei. So the Mitteler Rebbe is explaining here that this level of Ratzon Kadum, this secondary stage of the Ratzon that is not yet revealed, but it holds all potential revelation within itself prior to that which is going to be actualized, which is wedged between the nothingness of the original emergence of the Ratzon that we have no access to, which is the Chafetz Chesed of Pashut and its Muchlat B'kol in the Tachlis Apshitos, and eventual emergence, rests this Ratzon HaKadum, this in-between space, which is the potentiation towards emergence prior to emergence itself. And the Mitteler Rebbe is saying that in the language of Kabbalah, this is referred referred to as Atika da Atikin, Atika Stima'a, the concealment of concealment, which is the source of the unfolding of this Ratzon. And then the Mitteler Rebbe hints to the fact that we know that Ratzon is a secondary level to Ta'anug, because there's two levels to Keser. There's Atuk and Arich. And Atik is Tainug, which is the interiority of Keser, and Arich is Ratzon, which is the exteriority of Keser. But as the Heilige Rebbe Rashab is masbir in Hemshech Samech Vav over and over again, the fact that we're not quite sure which one drives which is ultimately reflective of the fact that they're both fundamentally unified together, that there's no will without pleasure and there's no pleasure without will. And ultimately, at this lofty place, the reason that the Ratzon HaKadum is Mushrash b'mitzcha da Atika, which is the place of Atik, is because in that lofty place, the Tainug and the Ratzon are unified together. And then the Mitteler Rebbe says that even at the higher level of the Ratzon HaPashut, that's Meshuar b'pnimius of Atzmusi Baruch Kavyachol, even in that place there's a unification between pleasure and Ratzon, in spite of the fact that we're not talking about levels that can be revealed yet, as was described in Parak Yud and Parak Yud Aleph. Everything was contained together, and what that's referred to, that shorish of Tainug in the most interior of places, prior to revelation whatsoever, is going to be referred to as the Sha'ashuei HaMelech Ba'atzmuso, the inner intensification of the playfulness of pleasure, so to say, from within the essence of godliness, so to say, meaning to say that it's prior to any engagement external to itself. The sha'ashua is an inner playfulness that is autogenetic. It emerges from within itself. It's a minei bay. It does not need any externalization to awaken itself, but rather it is a self-splitting that reveals the process of those two elements of the split to be unified back together by way of desire, and that's the sha'ashuei hamelech ba'atzmuso. That's operating at the highest of levels. V'gam begimul madregos ad sheba b'davar haprat ana emloch shezeu b'chinas malchus de'ein soif shelifnei hatzimtzum k'may shekasav sham. And the Mitteler Rebbe is explaining that these levels that we're now applying to the innermost ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu by the sha'ashuei hamelech ba'atzmuso, we also already spoke about the three gradational levels that take place until we come to that place of the malchus de'ein sof, which is even prior to the tzimtzum, which is again highlighting all of the various levels of changes and movement from potential into actualized potential, and then coming to realize that that actualization is still not actually actualized, but it's still in a potential state. All of these slow and steady shifts and changes between one level and one gradation of potential down towards the congealment of potential until it eventually congeals into the actualization of potential itself is giving us the access point as to how to understand how pure potentiality prior to revelation and pure actualization after revelation are ultimately two sides of the same exact coin. Hakol b'china sha'ashuei hamelech ba'atzmo b'tihir u'ilah. All of the emergence of existence, even prior to the tzimtzum, is this inner playfulness, the sha'ashuei hamelech, this revelation for the sake of revelation and for no other sake. Ach atika da'atikin mikor kol ha'ta'anugim oy ra'avad kol ravin v'chulei. But the level that we're talking about now, of the Ratzon of all Ritzonos, of the Ta'anug of all Ta'anugim, which is the Mitzcha, which is the forehead of Adam Kadmon Kavyachol, which is the Hiskalus of the Ra'ava Deravin, which is the Mitzcha Da'atik, which is the Giloi of the unification between Ta'anug and Ratzon, in spite of the fact that this was apparently true on all levels prior to this state. Nevertheless, it's down here at the Ratzon HaKadum, which is the unification of Ta'anug and pleasure together, where it actually is going to bear an imprint and it's going to mark all subsequent stages of unfolding. This level of Atika Da'atik in the Ratzon HaKadum, which we're describing, is the source of all actualized pleasure or all actualized desire that emerges afterwards. Hainu bebechinas hakav sha'achar hatzimtzum shekoilel kama ritzonis v'ta'anugim sha'asidim lavoi begiloi. Meaning, in spite of the fact that this unification between pleasure and desire is true at all levels, and sha'ashuei hamelech ba'atzmo, even koydem atzimtzum, nevertheless, it's at this station of the Ratzon HaKadum, which is the Ratzon prior to emergence, which contains all possible expression afterwards, it's this Ratzon that actually becomes the source of all actualized Ritzonos, because all fundamental process is the fact that the subsequent stage only has access to the stage higher than it. So obviously the stage higher than it is going to have the qualities of all of the stages that preceded it, but the subsequent stage can only retrieve the stage prior to it. And it's this point at the emergent principles of Seder Shtalshlus, of the Atika Ba'atikin, or the Ra'ava de Kol Ravin of the Ratzon HaKadum, which is being Meskala after the Tzimtzum. Once the Kav is Meskala within the Tzimtzum, that's going to become the real point of origin. that we can be misyaches things back to. Va'atika stima'a, and this notion of atika stima'a, hu bebechinas keser de adam kadmon, shehu behe'elem haratzin v'hatanug la'atzmo adayin. This level that we're speaking about is already the highest level along the chain that we're eventually going to have accessibility to. It's the Keser of Adam Kadmon, the highest point of what we have graspability to in this world. This Ratzon Kadum is now what we begin to see as the very end of the infinite worlds above and the very beginning of the finitization of the worlds in the Chalal HaPanui itself. So that this Keser Da'ak, which is the Atika Stima'ah, which is the Atika Da'atikin, which is the Ra'ava D'choravin, which is the Ratzon HaKadum, which is koilel all of the ritzonos and all of the ta'anugim and all of the sha'ashuim that are eventually going to be revealed within reality. It's here, the keser the adam kadmon, which is going to be the source of all eventual expression, in spite of the fact that it still remains in a concealed state of desire, a concealed state of pleasure that is still contained within itself prior to revelation. Rak shechoyshev lihiyois hadavar kach bepoyel hagiloi k'moy lihiyois giloi haratzon v'hatanug laha'atzil eser sviros v'chulei. But the only difference here is that in spite of the fact that the Ratzon and the Tainug of this level of the Atika D'chol Atikin, of the Rava D'Ravin, of after the Tzimtzum and after the Kav enters into the Tzimtzum and the Keser of Adam Kadmon, over here it's like the thoughts that are being thought for eventual revelation. And in spite of the fact that the thought is still contained Kavyachol within the mind of the thinker and it's not yet revealed, nevertheless we can trace all eventual revelation back up to this hidden source of the Machshava Kaduma that begins to emerge. So here we're already talking about a level of revelation that is shaykh to us. That's why this level, in spite of the fact that it's not revealed to us, we can still claim that it's an element of concealment in relationship to the eventual revelation that's going to take place afterwards. Masha'enkin, all of the other previous stages prior to revelation cannot even be considered he'elem. They can't be considered concealed because concealment implies that I'm speaking from a perspective of what revelation should look like. So at this point, we can refer to it as he'elem because we're almost at the edge of revelation. But all of the stages prior to it, in spite of the fact that we used language of he'elem, it's not actual he'elem because we have no susceptibility to revelation. And if we have no susceptibility to the revelation of those levels prior to the tzimtzum and the entrance of the kav, so it's not even considered he'elem. Here in the Ratzon HaKadum, it can be considered something that's ne'elam from us because we have some shaykhs to it. We have some awareness of the fact that we can't access it. Masha'en came the other levels, which we can't even contemplate what it means to not be able to be masig them, and therefore they have no actual application of the term ne'elam. For this reason that we can refer to as the Ratzon HaKadam as something that's ne'elam, because ultimately it's going to have some relationship with that which is subsequently revealed. Masha'en kain, says the Mitteler Rebbe, which is the very beginningness of the Kav, which is referred to as stimu destimin. That's more shaykh to something that has no accessibility within the eventual chain of unfolding, and that is concealed even from the machshava of Adam Kadmon, which doesn't have grasp of it. Sagt der heilige Mitteler Rebbe, Uliyos haratzon v'hatainug livroya v'atika kadishahu hata'anug shebechachma v'hu bechinas atik yoimin v'arech anpin da'atzilus shaharatzon v'hatainug bo begiloi k'mo she'yisbar hakol b'derech prat. And the Mitteler Rebbe continues to explain how all of these gradations of desire and pleasure and the different expressions of atika and ratzon that are going to be revealed from within this ratzon akadum is going to be the entire unfolding process of the seder hashtalshalis that come about after the igulim. V'hine bechinas eser sviros the igulim ze b'toich ze. Now the first expression, the first level of expression, which is these 10 circles that encircle themselves one within the other, hu kiyadua shakol ila makefet la'alul, ve'alul lo yasig le'ila shalo, ki ela berichuk makom mimenu, ka'asher yeh ha'oifen b'toich ha'oifen. So the nature of these circles within circles, or these concentric circles, reveals what we said before. It reveals the fact that every source of an eventual revelation can grasp the revelations that come from within it. But the revelations cannot grasp the source that they come from except by way of a distance. And so this is the relationship of a higher level to a lower level, which is very often referred to in the Svarim of the Kadmonim as the Ila and the Alul, the source and the extension of the source. This mode of unfolding represents a higher level and a lower level. And because there's a higher level and a lower level, so there is a separation between one level to the other. And the higher level encircles and encompasses the lower level. So every source can know that which emerges from within the source. But because it's a hierarchical system and the lower extension is removed in distance from the upper source, so the extension and the revelation that comes from the source cannot return back up to the source. It can only grasp its source by way of a distance, which is a secret of the wheels within the wheels. V'yuvan ze meharatzon haba begilui gamor, shagam shekolul haratzon hazeh me chochma v'midos. Aval tchilaso ba rak beheskem echad beli hischalkus nikarbo. V'hu nikar igul ratzon klali makif l'chol ma sheba besocho mikocho dafka. Ach berichuk makom kamo hatam v'haseichel ratzon zeh shenikra alul shelo, I efshar sheyakaruv be'erech el ilaso shu haratzon. So the Mitteler Rebbe is giving a very practical example. Let's look at these 10 concentric circles that emerge into the halal as the highest being the most powerful and the lowest being the least. So it goes from Keser to Chachma to Bina to Chesed, Gvur, Tveres, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. So the most externalized circle is the Keser, and the most interiorized circle is the Malchus itself. So Keser represents Ratzon. Chachma is wisdom. Bina is understanding. Chesed is the desire to extend. Gvura is the withholding potential. Tiferes is the unification of those opposites. Netzach and Hod is the breaking through of the barriers of extension and regression. Then there's the Yesod, which is where everything coalesces together. Then there's the Malchus of the revelation. So based on what we're saying, the most externalized circle is the Ratzon. Now, the Ratzon for something gives birth to Chachma, it gives birth to Bina, it gives birth to Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes. Those all emerge from within the Ratzon. So Ratzon, will, can look at all of the unfolding stages that follow it and understand how they're going to play out. But the Chachma, which is level lower than Ratzon, it can't grasp its Ila. It can't grasp its source, which is Ratzon. The Ratzon is always Davar Ne'elam. Why? Because Chachma can't grasp the Ratzon. Bina can't grasp the Ratzon. Chesed, Gvur, Tfaris, they can't retrieve the original emergence of Ratzon. Only Ratzon can understand how Chachma is going to emerge and Bina is going to emerge because it sees everything in one fell swoop. But to retrace the steps and go back to the original instantiation of Ratzon is an impossibility. It's just considered a generalized shape of a Ratzon that surrounds all things that are going to eventually be revealed afterwards. Ki harei ein tam l'Ratzon klal ki yadua. Like as we know, Chachma can't understand why it wants something. It just wants something because Chachma can't extend itself back to the light of Keser because the inner circles are a step lower than the upper circle. So here we're beginning to see how in the Seder of Hishtalshalis at the Reishas Akav, we're already beginning to see the separation and the division of levels, which is going to lead to all of the proliferation of all of the pratim. Ula oilam lo yasigenu. And that which is lower, meaning to say the circles of Chachma and Bina and Chesed through Malchus, will never be able to grasp the most externalized and most encompassing circle, which is the circle of Keser, which is the circle of Ratzon, and we know that Ein Tam LeRatzon. Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Mikoyach HaRatzon Na'ase Igol HaChachma Gam Ken Beli Hischalkus Nikerle. But that's only true, this irretrievability from the outgrowth to return back to its source, for that which is lower to retrieve that which is higher, that's only vis-a-vis the perspective of above down to of below back up above, where the lower levels cannot retrieve the true essence of the higher level. But from the perspective of above to below, the perspective of Ratzon holds everything within itself. It's all expressed through Ratzon. Chachma, even though it can't come back to Ratzon, is a direct extension of Ratzon, just as Bina is a direct extension of Chachma, v'chule ad until a person comes until the Malchus, which is Achron Chaviv, which is a fundamental revelation of the Keser. But that's only vis-a-vis the encircling perspective of Ratzon HaKlali. So in spite of the fact that Chachma can't grasp Keser and Bina can't grasp Chachma and all of the subsequent levels can't return back to the original point from whence they emerged, nevertheless contained within this initial Ratzon is all of the eventual circles of Chachma without any separation whatsoever. Kamola Mashal. For example, Hashoiched sheyimtze tam l'ratzon. וגם שבטעם זה כלול גם כן מיוד רצונוס ושכל ומידוס, אבל נעשה בבחינס כללי וכולי. That when a person is trying to figure out why they want something or the emergence of their ratzon, they'll always be able to see how every level is able to trace its roots back to ratzon, the fact that it emerged from the will. But the original will can never be conceived as anything other than an all-encompassing perspective that can't be grasped. So too, just as Chachma can't grasp the circle of Keser and Ratzon that it comes from, so too the circle of Bina can't grasp the circle of Chachma that it comes from. This happens each and every level. Chachma can't grasp Keser. Bina can't grasp Chachma. Chesed can't grasp Bina. Gvura can't grasp Chesed. V'chule v'chule, down to the lowest point, which is the Seif Maaseh, which is the circle of Malchus, which is the Igul Ha'acharon. All of it, in spite of the fact that they can't grasp one level above them, nevertheless, they're all contained within the original Ratzon, the Atzmo, Kalul HaKol, Ad Seif Maaseh, Shehu Pnimius Mikulam v'chule. All of the subsequent circles are still contained within the original circle, in spite of the fact that the subsequent circles can't return back to the original circle. Everything is rooted in Ratzon, in spite of the fact that it can't understand the Ratzon in which it is rooted. The Kachu b'Ratzon ha'ne'elam ha'nikra Ratzon ha'kadum ha'nizker la'el. So too with regards to this general shape of concealment of will, the original desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which enters in through the Kav, and it's going to be considered the Keser of Adam Kadmon, in spite of the fact that nothing is fundamentally revealed yet, it is the site through which all particularization emerges. It is the makor of kol haritzonos kol meyud siros al darach zeh, igul b'toich igul ad igul d'seif maise, shu haratzon l'seif maise el yolka kol asher chafetz oise b'poyel ub'mamish. Poyel Maisa. Everything, all eventual extension, the Ratzon and the Chachma and the Bina and all of the gradations of unfolding are all contained within that original circle of the Ratzon HaKadum, which is not yet revealed in any way. It contains everything. Soif Masav Machshavat Chila. V'ha'igul ha'elyon ha'kolel ha'kol hu Ratzon HaKadum ha'nizka la'el. And this all-encompassing circle that encompasses all things is the secondary stage after the Tihiru Tata, is that Ratzon HaKadum, that Atika da Atikin, the steam of the steaming. Ukeshaba haratzon atzmoi hazel liyos b'poyel b'maisa. And what happens when it's time for all of these things that are contained within this original ungraspable will to emerge externally, liyos b'poyel b'maisa, so that those subsequent levels contained within its potential can be revealed. Harihu lehepach. שהרצון מתעלם ומתלבש בשכל והשכל מקיפוי והשכל מתעלם ומתלבש במידוס זה בתוך זה עד סוף מייסה הוא העליון מהכל. דהיינו כוח המייסה בפועל ממש. הרי בוי מלובש המחשב ובמחשב מלובש המידוס ובמידוס מלובש החול ובחוכמה מלובש הרצון והתענוג ודמסה פנימי מכולם. והוא הרצון להסענג והחיצון שבכולם הוא המייסה גרוע. After we understand the nature of the igulim, which is that the most encompassing principle is the most expansive principle, and it's the one that we have least access to because it contains all possibility within itself prior to actualization, that's the perspective of the igulim. That's where the most exterior level is going to be considered the highest level because it represents that which is most removed from our grasp. And each and every subsequent level has no accessibility to the upper level. But like we said, the purpose of all things is not simply the igulim, which operate like this ila va'alul, where the source grasps all of the extensions, but the extensions cannot retreat back to the source. The ultimate purpose is to go even further and reveal the yosher, to reveal the linearity, which is the details and the separation of levels so that there can be human engagement. That's the tachlis of all things, for the Ben Adam to enter in to the process of being the Seder of Hishtalshlus, of the Kav, Yamin, Small, and Emsa, which is reflective of the human being, as opposed to the Igulim, which represents Teva, represents the equal nature of nature itself. And so by the Igulim, the upper level is the highest level and it contains all of the subsequent levels, and the subsequent levels cannot return back to the higher level. But when it comes to Yoshar, we said it's a differentiation of values, that it's not that the thing that is most externalized is going to be that which is of highest level. The purpose of Yoshar, the purpose of revelation is that Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu Lios Lodir B'Tachtonim, and it's not enough to stay above in Ratzon, but the Ratzon needs to be Miskal in the Chachma, and the Chachma needs to go into the Bina, and the Bina needs to go into the Midos, and the Midos need to reveal themselves down in Malchus, which is the Seif Masa b'Machshava Tchila. That from the perspective of Yoshar, the lowest level is most fundamental because that's where Avodah is going to be. So from this perspective, it's a very different perspective. It's not that we're trying to retreat back up to the encircling levels that we don't have access to. Over here, we see how the higher levels conceal themselves within the lower levels, and then the lower levels are able to express themselves down to the point that they become something formidable and practical. That on the level of Igulim, the Ratzon is inaccessible and it contains all things. On the level of Yosher, there's a secret of Halbasha. The higher levels are concealing themselves within the lower levels so as to enable the finalization and the concretization of expression, which only takes place on the level of action. So from the perspective of Yoshar, the Ratzon, the Keser, is concealed within Chachma, and the Chachma is concealed within Bina, and the Bina then expresses itself within the Midos, and the Midos expresses itself within Malchus. So that in Malchus, in Soif Maseh, b'Machshava Tchila, in the lowest level of expression, what we're going to come to find is that all of the previous levels are embedded within it. That's going to be from the Yoshar perspective, where it's all about revelation. And now we'll go back to the words of the Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe that we just read. Right? So when it wants to be revealed in an actualized way, which is going to be the Yosher, which is going to be actualization, it's the opposite of the previous level where the upper levels are concealed from the lower levels. Because over here, the Ratzon mit'alim u'mitzlabish b'seichel. Over here, the upper level is being concealed and being engarbed within the lower level of the Seichel. And then the Seichel surrounds it, and the Seichel then hides itself and conceals itself within the Midos, and then it becomes the garment of the Midos, down to the point where it becomes the Soif Maseh, which is from this perspective of the Koyach HaMaisa going to be considered the highest level. The highest level is going to be the lowest level of revelation. That within this lowest level of the Koyach HaMaisa is engarbed, is malubash the machshava, and within the machshava there's the midos, and within the midos there's the chachma and bina, and then there's the ratzon ha'elyon. Everything is contained within the lowest maisa. And this is the element of the yoshar. Igulim represents ilav alul. Igulim represents that the source gives birth to the outgrowth, but the outgrowth has no accessibility to the source. The source contains the outgrowth within it. But in Yoshar, it's the secret of Halbasha, where the higher levels are engarbed within the lower levels, where the lower levels now become the vehicles to reveal the higher levels. This is why the fundamental point of Hashem's revelation vis-a-vis human experience is not by way of the Igulim, but rather by way of the Yoshar. That's one of the chidushim of the Arizal, that he brought down this principle of the Yoshar, which is that we carry all of the higher levels. The first way of perspective, the teva of all things, the igulim of all things, so it's the ilav alul. We already have that access point within the philosophy of Yiddishkeit, where the upper contains all subsequent levels, but the lower levels cannot receive the upper level. But the secret of the Yoshar is the secret of Habasha. It's where the upper level conceals itself, hides itself, and engarbs itself within the lower level, so that the lower level, by way of concealing the higher level, becomes the vehicle through which the higher level can be shown, the veil through which that ungraspable light of the higher level can now be condensed and undergo a process of diminution so that it can be revealed and grasped by the lower levels. That's the perspective of the Yoshar, that when it comes through the hislabshus of the engarment of the higher level within the lower level, but this original source of Ratzon, which is still Igulim that we described, which is prior to all potential, Adayin hu ba'atzmo. It's still contained within itself. We're not yet at the point of revelation. In kain nimshach bebechinas igulim. The reason that this Ratzon Kadom is only revealed by way of circles first is because it's ungraspable to us, because it's the highest level. And therefore the highest level is going to be considered the most concealed level. that holds all eventual light within itself. And then the next circle is going to be the next subsequent revelation. And the first circle is going to be the original light of desire and will towards the entirety of the Seder HaHishtalshelus, which is going to unfold within itself. And this initial circle is Makif HaKlali La'abiyah Kenizka Le'el. And this first eagle that surrounds all things within it, which is ungraspable to us, that's that first eagle, the Tihiru Tata that we spoke about, the first thing that fills the Halal. But it's still prior to the revelation that we're going to see of engarbment that takes place through the process of Yosher itself. V'reishes hakav hu bechinas hamshacha hiyulit kamo kav katzer shemitztamstem me'ela alul. The initial emergence of the kav, the machshava kaduma, the ratzon kadum of Adam Kadmon, which is still in the form of igulim that contains all things within itself and is ungraspable to subsequent levels, it expresses itself as a kav, as a singular, minimal, measured array of light that contains all potential within itself, that conceals itself and allows itself to undergo diminution from source to outgrowth, from source to outgrowth, so too from the desire towards wisdom, towards understanding, v'chule v'chule. So too from the aspect of the Rishimu Hanal Nimshach HaKav B'tzimtzum Gadol Ma'oid. But we have to understand that this Ratzam Kadum, even though it contains all things within itself, even though it represents this profoundly integrated state where all things are available, and it's a fundamental light of the revelation of an infinitude, nevertheless, we have to understand that it's after the tzimtzum. And because it's answered after the tzimtzum, the kav is drawing itself from the rishimu. And we spoke about already how the rishimu is not the absencing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light from prior to the tzimtzum, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light is always present. But what it is a reduction of all of that extension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light into a pinpoint dot that contains all things within itself, which is the Nekudas HaRishimu, that Nakuda that contains all things. And it's from that place, from within the concealment of the infinite light, that is the Rishimu, that this Kav is going to be drawing itself down. And therefore, in spite of the fact that it's still a Ratzon HaKodum, nevertheless, it's still in a profound level of Tzimtzum. Dehagam shaharishimu hu ba bahagvala kenizka la'el, aval hu bebechinas oilam ha'ein soif al kol panim, rak shu bebechinas achreina shene'esa bekitzur v'chulei. Because the Rishimu, that in spite of the fact that it's the lowest level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light, it's still considered HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light nevertheless. And therefore, it's like the kitzur that comes at the end. Masha'ein kain, the ratzon and the kav that's going to be drawn down, it's no longer relegated completely to the worlds of the infinite, because this ratzon kadum, it eventually is going to become the root source of all emergence that exits the revealed worlds of the infinite light. This is what we were saying, that this Ratzon HaKadum is the beginningness of the system, in spite of the fact that it's not yet systematized, but it's still something that is going to be considered the root source of all eventual unfolding. But that means that it's going to have separate set of halachos on the Rishimu, and it's separate from the Rishimu. So this kav draws itself from the tzimtzum, and even though we said that the rishimu is not really a tzimtzum because it's still the condensation of all of the infinite light contained within a particular dot, that's not going to be true once we speak about a subsequent level, which is going to be this kav, which is drawing itself down, but tzimtzum gadol ma'od. That in spite of the fact that the rishimu, even though it comes by way of minimization, nevertheless it's still contained within the worlds of the infinite. But over here, by the Ratzon Kadum, which we're talking about, which is eventually going to be something that comes l'chlal ha'ashpa'a l'chutz me'olam ha'in sof, which is going to give shape to all of those things that emerge afterwards in the chalal ha'panu, which is going to be the emergence of the worlds of Adam Kadmon. It's just that rakshuhu hiyuli ha'koil ha'kol, at this level it's still not revealed yet. Imkein nimshach derav kav katzer v'chule v'day l'mevin. Over here we have the beginningness of measure. The reason that we have the beginningness of measure here, in spite of the fact that it's all contained within itself, is because we're now a level beneath the Rishimu. It's a hamshacha from the Rishimu. And yes, the Rishimu is infinite light in the infinitesimal point of itself, and there's no differentiation between the quality of infinitude prior to the Rishimu or in the Rishimu itself. Once the Rishimu holds the infinite light by way of its pointed nature, the kav that is nimshach from that Rishimu, which becomes the beginningness of the subsequent levels, which is the Ratzon HaKadum, now we are already going to begin to see the differentiation of shape and color and size, which is going to be the reason that this kav is only going to be nimshach by way of a kav katzer. So it enters in as a kav and it doesn't saturate the entire halal again with infinite light as it was before creation of the world, because then the whole tzimtzum wouldn't be viable. But because it's nimshach from the Rishimu and it's nechshav as a he'elim davar, so therefore it can come down in measurable ways. And this is what the Mitteler Rebbe says here in parentheses. V'hu masha kasav be'etz chaim. This is what's explained in Eitz Chaim. D'chol ikar ha'aras hakav eino rak liyos b'chinas malu mata k'may b'yud igulim ad seif ma'isa v'chulei. That the entire purpose of the kav is so that there can be actually the gradations of levels in spite of the fact that everything is contained within itself. Masha ein ken ba'olam ha'ein sof, which is not the case with the Rishimu and upwards. Ein sham afilu b'chinas malu mata. Rak achdus pashut betachlis. There's no notion of differentiation or measure or a slow and steady descent, which is ultimately the thing that's going to be necessary for the emergence of reality. So this place of the Ratzon HaKodum, this emergence of the Kav into the Igulim, is of fundamental significance because it really represents the apex of the system, the Keser Da'ak, that we have the ability to reconnect ourselves to, in spite of the fact that it's still Nechshav as this Heilig form of pure potentiality prior to revelation. Nevertheless, it's the closest that we have to graspability. The gam shashir ba'atzmu mash asid v'chulei. Hakol ba'atzmu samamish u'b'chinas ein soif mamish. Prior to this Ratzon HaKodum, even though there were gradations of measure, even there were prior levels of measurement and potential, nevertheless, those are still considered fundamentally infinite within themselves, mamish. Even by the Rishimu, the Malchus Ein Sof prior to the Tzimtzum, even though that seems to be such a differentiated level, nevertheless, that's still contained within the worlds of the absolute infinite, so to say. It's only here, Rak B'Bechinas HaKav, which extends from the Rishimu, and then it expresses itself in the Roish of Adam Kadmon Kavyachol, Shehu B'Chinas Mekor Harishon. Now we're beginning to talk about actual levels of grasp and the beginning of our system, L'chol HaEshtalshalos, that everything is eventually going to unfold from, down to the prata yoter mefurat sheyachol aparit, the most particularized particular that can possibly be particularized. Yuchal level b'hasaga b'riboy ha'eshtalshus ad eses virus da'atzilus b'biyah. From this point of the Ratzon Kadam, we can now extrapolate and we can figure out how to climb our way back up the number line of Seder Eshtalshalos until we find how the eses virus of Atzilus, as they express themselves within the worlds of Bri Yitzir and Asiya, down to the lowest possible place, can still be traced back to this Ratzon HaKadam. So here we're talking about the initial investiture of the infinite light after the Tzimtzum, after the Malchus Ein Sof, after the Rishimu. Here is the Kav that is now going to be able to be a measured expression. Because now we're talking about the beginning of all beginnings. And to talk about a beginning, even though it's the beginning of all beginnings, and even though it's still in a state of pure potentiality, nevertheless, that's something that's shaykh, that's relatable to the level that we're at. Or it might be referred to as a kadmon, which implies the first in an order of a system that's going to be unfolding. But everything that ascends from this point, the Rishimu and upwards, that's referred to as the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and leis machshava tvisa beklal, even the ilat kol ilot, even this highest level, even the machshava kadum of Adam Kadmon has no graspability to those levels above it. Because in the end of the day, the worlds of infinitude are separated by way of a fundamental separation. It's not that we're not good enough to grasp it. It's just that it's a fundamentally separate order of being that the human experience and mind is incapable of grasping. So this machshava kaduma, this ratzon kadum, is really going to be the interface between the infinite worlds of Or Ein Sof and the graspable worlds of Bri Yitzira Asiya, and that's going to be the world of Adam Kadmon and Atzilus that comes from it. That's why those worlds of infinitude are referred to as kadosh legamre, mitzarat tzimtzum hanal. We don't have access to them. We can't go back to them. Ubechinas ratzon kadum hanal, but this ratzon that now is after the tzimtzum, nikra shmo hagadol. Here already we have a yachas to a name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the name is only for the sake of those who are going to call out the name. And here at the beginning of Adam Kadmon, we're beginning to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a name. Shemo is the gematria of 346, which is the gematria of Ratzon. We don't know the name yet, but we know that there is a desire for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reveal himself, and that's the highest point we can go back to. And this is the secret of his great name that's going to be expressed downwards through the Seder of Hishtalshalis. Ki adua de bechinas Adam Kadmon. because Adam Kadmon is the lashon of bracha, which is hamshacha, which is that which is going to be revealed to us. Because even though Adam Kadmon is the loftiest of all levels that we have the capacity to grasp, nevertheless, in relationship to that which precedes it, it's referred to as the Adam Debriya. It's considered as something that's somewhat deficient by way of the relativization of the system. Kamoshe Yispire, as we're going to explain. Masha'in kin ba'atzmus or in sof, which is not the case when it comes to the absolute nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light. What we say over there, ne'emar kiloi adamhu, there's no shifting there. Only by the Ratzon HaKadim after the Tzimtzum is there going to begin to be a differentiation of levels, v'chulei, and a measurement, which is going to express itself by way of minimization and maximization. Kamoshe Yispire be'ezras Hashem. Ki yadua b'kavanus d'nishmas kol chai shu b'chinas adam kadmoin v'dai lemevin. Okay, but Ezra Hashem, we're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there.